We all have needs, and perhaps in these difficult financial times, the needs that we have are becoming increasingly apparent. We have need for food, for shelter, to pay the bills that we need for our families, for those we love and care for, to not only survive but to thrive. Some people aren't meeting that threshold, in part perhaps because other people's needs could be more accurately described as greed. John Peachy joining me on the program. JP, kia ora, good morning. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, kia ora. Yeah. I'm a bit grumpy about this subject, actually, but can I just mention that the person who wrote the song Strength to Let Go had never been bungee jumping off the Auckland Harbour Bridge.
Actually, a friend of my son's, they pushed him off the bridge last week for a stag do.
Yeah, nice.
In a pink tutu, and he didn't have the strength. Somebody had to push him. Just saying.
No. I scream like a girl, to be quite honest.
You've done the jump?
I did, and I did it in Queenstown years ago with a friend of mine who's a pastor, which was quite effective because I figured we kind of cover both ends of the scale. If I was going to die, he was there. But
totally.
They did the 1, 2, 3 jump 2 times. The third time they said, if you don't go this time, you're getting down. So he went 1, 2, push. And that was that.
Yeah.
Still screaming like a girl. But anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, on to other things. I mean, back in the 80s, Gordon Gekko said that greed was good. This is capitalism. This is what makes the world go round. This is what gives us our economy that allows us to thrive. If you don't like that, go live in communist Russia. Oh, yeah, that's right. That plan didn't work either.
No, that's right. Turns out he wasn't correct in his little assumption in the 80s. And I keep coming across this actually lately, and it makes me grumpy. I happened to be reading Facebook yesterday, and someone had moaned about the fact that a supermarket or a mall had charged them $40 for parking longer than their 90-minute limit.
What?
And and I'm like, well, hang on a minute. If there's not enough parking at the mall, that's not the fault of the customer.
Mm-hmm.
That's the fault of the mall. And the retailers need to complain to the mall ownership about that. But $40 for parking longer than 90 minutes. Well, the minimum wage in this country is $23.15.
Yeah.
So that means you've got to earn more than 2 hours of work, in fact, probably closer to 3, to pay a $40 bill.
Yeah.
We are so far out of balance in this that it's actually really, really ridiculous. Another slight example of that is a close friend of mine had to go and have an MRI. And because of the backup in the public system, had to pay private fees. Well, it was $3,000.
Wow.
$3,000 for one MRI, and there was a possibility they needed 2. Well, at the average wage, you're looking at 130 hours of work or something to pay for one MRI. I mean, how on earth is that balanced, fair, or even possible for the average family? When you look at the costs of living, and we really need to get serious about this, actually, I think, because the weekly averages are actually quite shockingly low in this country.
Yeah.
I know we're a low wage economy, we're a high cost of living. But just like good old Gordon Gekko, here's the problem, right? If you and I have got no money to spend, then the people at the top are going to have no income.
Yeah.
It's like this is not rocket science, right? So it's time for us to do something different. And I said to the people actually who were saying on Facebook about being charged $40 for a fine for parking over 90 minutes, I said boycott them all. Just don't go, right?
Yeah.
And there was a bit of an outcry and a supporting outcry for me saying that. It's like, just take your money somewhere else.
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm getting a bit militant about this. The difference, just to give you some stats, so the minimum wage, $23.15, which a number of companies, large brands, are advertising jobs for, which just bugs me. Let's pay the bare minimum.
Yeah.
But the living wage, according to the government, is $27.80. Well, that's $4. So technically $4.65 difference per hour over a year. That's $10,000.
Wow.
So the government itself is saying, well, hang on a minute, it costs you $10,000 a year, actually more than the minimum wage that we're enforcing.
Yeah.
Well, how does that work exactly?
I think shoplifting is the only way that you can make up the difference. Not that I'm advocating for that, of course, but I mean, it does get to the point of there's the needs that we have, the basic subsistence that people have, doing whatever they can to survive, to put food on the table, but then also a little bit of greed. Yes, prices in the supermarket are driven by inflation and terrible growing seasons in the Hawke's Bay and all those sorts of things. But the foreign-owned supermarkets are making record profits, which they return to their shareholders, as are the Aussie banks. And whoever clapped a fine on that person's windscreen, I'm sure that that car parks, people that run car parks, special case for them perhaps. I mean, they're not going broke. They're making a profit. The difference between need and greed in those situations, John.
Yeah, it is crazy. And, I think people who, and I'll be careful how I say this, I appreciate people who work their backside off and create wealth for themselves and for other people. And I'm not a believer in criticizing corporates for not paying tax, because for me, that's a completely erroneous. Oh, I never said Roger then. It's erroneous. Yeah. It's yes. Yeah, I know. I'll move on very quickly. Edit button. But the corporates employ a whole bunch of people, and they pay leases and they buy products. I mean, they're paying tax. It's a ridiculous thing to say that corporates don't pay tax. They do pay tax, but they just pay it through their employees. So it's a different way of paying it. And in fact, I'm in favor of subsidizing large organizations to build more infrastructure so that there's more jobs. I think that's a great thing to do.
Yeah.
People are being employed. But the imbalance here has got ridiculous. If you cannot afford, in fact, I had this conversation a number of years ago with Bill English when he was the Minister of Finance, and I said to him, if mum and dad go out to work every week, using the nuclear family as an example, and at the end of that week, their normal wages cannot satisfy their normal expenses, then we have economic slavery in this country.
Yeah.
Well, he just manifested. I mean, he wasn't happy with that at all. But I'm like, well, you in this situation now, particularly in the Auckland market, and I think probably Wellington, Christchurch, and other places, if you're a single person, you do not have a choice to live alone. You are forced to live with other people because of the cost of living.
Yeah.
Now, is that a terrible thing? I don't know, but it's an economic force that you can't do things. So if you are sick and you need an MRI and you can't get it, you don't have medical insurance and you can't get it through the medical system, you have to pay 100 times your hourly rate to get that service. Now, how does that work in any normal society?
Yeah.
Grump, grump, grump.
Now, I was joking about the shoplifting thing beforehand, but actually there's a bit of truth to that. If you don't have the money that you need to feed your children, then desperate people do desperate things. And hey, I'm not advocating for this, but I have an empathy and an understanding for people doing whatever they need to do to supply their basic needs. Now, that is different than people ram-raiding luxury goods stores and just doing it for the thrills of it. But actually, when we talk about the sort of society that we want, if everybody is so desperate to get the basics that they need in order to survive, let alone thrive, we're just not going to be a very nice place to live, John.
No. And there's a difference between justification and understanding. And you can't justify, breaking the laws at all. That's, biblically or by the country's, moral and legislative laws. But you can understand the desperation that people get into. And I even think sometimes with the drug trade and other things that people have fallen into nefarious behavior because they're just desperate. It's been proven that the New Zealand banks, or the Australian-owned New Zealand banks, have the highest profit margins in the world.
Yeah.
I mean, by what justification is that? And I mean, all that money goes offshore. So every piece of interest you pay on your mortgage leaves the New Zealand economy, goes overseas. Well, virtually all of it. So the head of the head of Woolworths Group in Australia, the CEO, was interviewed recently in a parliamentary inquiry and had to acknowledge that he'd earned the previous year over 8 million Australian dollars in terms of salary and bonus. He was embarrassed to say it, as he should have been. And I always have this argument: if you're paying a CEO $8 million a year, for example, and there are some CEOs in this country that pay that amount, you could not convince me that one person at 8 million was worth more than 16 people at $500,000 in terms of their skill, their potential, their creativity, and their professional ability. Once you get I think once you get above I'll be generous and say above $1 million worth of salary. Really, what difference is it? Whether it's 1, 10, 15, or 100, right? It's crazy when you think about the value that they're bringing to an organization. Yeah, we need to start. I'm not a socialist. I don't believe in that. I believe in rewarding people who work hard, and they should enjoy the fruits of their labor. But if your labor is suffering, then there ain't going to be any fruits.
Yeah.
Well, that's just a very simple equation.
No, totally. I thank you for your sentiment. Given that how much money Aussie banks and Aussie supermarkets are making from us poor, hard-driven Kiwis, following up on the Anzac weekend sticks in the throat a little bit, doesn't it, JP? But hey, thanks very much once again for your comments. Thanks for joining us today.
Nice to see you.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.